Hello everyone, this is session 2, and in this session we are going to look at international contribution to peace from a process of conflict prevention to peace building. This session will have a time to understand the framework for contribution to peace. Peace requires procedural efforts and sometimes international intervention at various stages, from prevention to intervention. According to United Nations peacekeeping operation principles and guidelines, conflict prevention involves the application of structural or diplomatic measures to keep intrastate or interstate tensions and disputes from escalating into violent conflict. Ideally, it should build on structured early warning, information gathering, and a careful analysis of the factors driving the conflict. Efforts to prevent disputes in advance are more effective than resolving disputes afterwards. Rwandan Genocide is a good example. The Rwandan Genocide is one of the most terrible events in human history, in which the Tutsi and the moderate Hutus were massacred by the majority Hutu during the Rwandan Civil War. Officially, it was reported that over 1 million people were murdered over a 100-day period from April 7th to mid-July in 1994. But this statistic does not include the bodies that were dumped in rivers or lakes or cremated during the massacre. This horrific massacre occurred on April 6, 1994, when the plane on which Rwandan president and Burundian president were riding were shot down while descending from Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. The death of the two Hutu presidents became the starting point of violence against the Tutsis and the centrist Hutus. In fact, however, no connection was found between the Tutsi and the suspects in the case. The conflicts and hatred between the two groups can be seen as the fundamental cause of the massacre. The tensions were created by the colonial policy of the European powers that ruled Rwanda. But a more immediate contributor could be found in the media. Before the massacre, radio broadcasts discussed the discrimination suffered by Hutus, while the Tutsis were in power, backed by colonial government. It said that during the colonial era, the Hutus were like slaves, and the massacre was a kind of slave rebellion. The stories spread on radio increased the anger of the majority of Hutu people and prompted them to take action. The radio broadcasts and magazines referred to the Hutus as cockroaches and dehumanized them, making the perpetrators feel less guilty about the murder. Ordinary citizens have turned into cruel demons. Before the incident occurred, extreme and violent messages appeared on the radio and magazines for quite a long time. Conflict prevention includes the efforts to recognize these signs and prevent the incidents in advance. Today, big data and AI can be useful for this job. Second, peacemaking. Peacemaking generally includes measures to address conflicts in progress and usually involves diplomatic action to bring hostile partners to a negotiated agreement. Peacemakers may also be envoys, governments, groups of states, regional organizations, or the United Nations. Peacemaking efforts may also be undertaken by unofficial and non-governmental group or by a prominent personality working independently. In June 2023, the leaders of 7 African countries, including South Africa, Senegal, Zambia, Egypt, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, and Comoros, met with Ukrainian President Zelensky and called for a halt to the war. Those leaders also met President Putin the day after. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa urged that the war must end and emphasized the opening of grain transport routes through the Black Sea. He also called for the exchange of prisoners from both sides and the return of children who fled their homes. Unfortunately, however, both Ukraine and Russia virtually refused the peace process. Peacemakers are often concerned not only with the establishing peace, but also with their own national security. In this case, the food situation in Africa, which was vulnerable due to climate change, conflict, and the global pandemic, was hit harder by the increase in international energy and food prices brought by the war in Ukraine. The East African region imports about 30% of its food needs from Russia and Ukraine. And Somalia and Eritrea in particular import almost all of their wheat needs from Russia and Ukraine. These African countries have suffered disruption in grain supply due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As a result, the food shortage became more serious. Peace enforcement involves a use of coercive measures, including the use of military force. The United Nations Security Council authorizes such action with the recognition that a threat to peace and breach of peace exists. The Security Council may utilize, where appropriate, regional organizations and agencies for enforcement action under its authority. The UN coalition that participated in the Korean War was composed of 63 nations and represented the first United Nations peace enforcement operation. Now Arlene will introduce the UN coalition that participated in the Korean War.
When talking about peace and Korea, it is also important to further look at the UN coalition that participated in the Korean War. After North Korean forces, supported by the Soviet Union and China invaded South Korea in June 1950, the UN condemned the attack and approved the United Nations Security Council Resolution 82, which called for the withdrawal of North Korean forces. However, since North Korea did not withdraw, the UNSC constituted its actions as a breach of peace, calling on the UN member states to provide assistance to South Korea in order to restore peace on the Korean peninsula. In the further course of the beginning of the war, the UNSC passed for the first time in history Resolution 84 and authorized the United States to establish and lead a unified command comprised of military forces from UN member states and to also command the operation under the flag of the United Nations. Based on that, the UN command was established under the leadership of the American General Douglas MacArthur. A total of 22 nations contributed military forces, for instance, in the form of troops or medical support to the United Nations Command during the Korean War. Key contributors besides the United States were, for example, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. The aim of the multinational coalition was to join forces in order to defend South Korea against the North Korean invasion and to restore peace and stability in the region. After a 3-year war, it eventually ended with an armistice agreement that was signed by representatives of the United Nations Command, including the United States and the Korean People's Army. The UN Command therefore played an important role in building a unified coalition in order to assist South Korea in defending itself and regaining peace.
Thank you, Eileen. In this session, we had a look at the process of intervention for peace, which started from conflict prevention, peacemaking, and peace enforcement. In the following session, we'll look at the last step, peacekeeping. Thank you.